The gates slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. Two security guards seized Naomi Carter by both arms and dragged her across the wet gravel toward the sidewalk, her heels scraping uselessly against the stones. Rain soaking through the thin fabric of her jacket until it clung to her skin like a second layer of humiliation. "I told you already," one guard barked, shoving her the final few feet. "Mr. Carter doesn't have a daughter." She stumbled, caught herself, refused to fall. Behind the towering iron gates, beneath the glowing columns of the largest mansion in Atlanta, stood the man who had once called her his greatest pride. Richard Carter, 68 years old, billionaire, founder of Carter Global Properties. He watched his own daughter kneel in the mud outside the home she grew up in, and his face did not move. Not a flicker, not a breath of hesitation. Naomi pressed her palms into the wet gravel and pushed herself up. Slowly, deliberately, water dripped from her chin. Her knees were scraped raw. She looked past the guards, past the gate, straight into the eyes of the father who had erased her from his life 15 years earlier. And then she smiled. Not the smile of a woman defeated. Not the smile of someone begging to be let back in. She smiled with certainty. The kind of smile that comes only to people who know something the whole world is about to find out. "By this time tomorrow," she said, her voice quiet but steady enough to cut through the rain. "You're going to wish you'd opened that gate." She turned. She walked into the storm carrying nothing but a torn backpack slung over one shoulder, disappearing into the dark, wet streets of Atlanta, while the people inside that mansion laughed and toasted champagne glasses, utterly unaware that they had just made the gravest mistake of their entire lives. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We would love to hear from you. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Somewhere in that skyline of glass towers and gleaming penthouses, a woman who once stood to inherit billions was now walking barefoot through puddles with nowhere to sleep. Somewhere in that mansion, a family was celebrating a victory that would soon unravel everything they had built on lies. Why would a billionaire deny his own daughter in front of security cameras and stunned neighbors? How did the woman once groomed to run one of America's largest real estate empires end up homeless on the very street she was raised on? Who actually destroyed Naomi's life 15 years ago? And why did it take her this long to come back? What did she know that no one else in that mansion knew? And why, after being thrown out into the rain like a stranger, did she smile like she had already won? Every answer hides something darker underneath it. Stay with us. 15 years earlier, Richard Carter was already a legend in Atlanta. He had built Carter Global Properties from nothing. No inheritance, no connections, just a young black man from a struggling neighborhood who refused to accept the life he was handed. Brick by brick, deal by deal, he clawed his way from managing a single rundown apartment complex to controlling some of the most valuable commercial real estate in the American South. Magazines called him a visionary. Competitors called him ruthless. His employees simply called him boss. And they said it with respect, not fear. But if you asked Richard what he was proudest of, he never mentioned the buildings. He talked about Naomi. From the time she was a little girl trailing behind him at construction sites in an oversized hard hat, Naomi had a mind that startled adults twice her age. She noticed things. She asked the right questions. By the time she was 24, she was sitting in boardrooms negotiating million-dollar contracts, while men who had been in the industry for decades quietly adjusted their strategies just to keep up with her. "She's not just my daughter," Richard used to tell his investors, pride thick in his voice. "She's the future of this company. When I'm gone, Carter Global doesn't fall apart. It gets stronger because of her." Employees loved her because she remembered their names, their kids' names, the small things that made people feel like more than numbers on a payroll. Investors respected her because she could read a balance sheet the way most people read a headline, instantly and without missing what was buried underneath. Everything was building toward one inevitable future. Naomi Carter, heir to an empire. Then Richard's first wife passed away, and grief opened a door that had been closed for years. Vanessa walked through it not long after. Polished, graceful, always perfectly composed. The kind of woman who could walk into any room and make it feel like the room had been waiting for her. Richard, lonely and vulnerable in a way he hadn't been in decades, fell for her fast. Vanessa brought elegance into the Carter household. She also brought her son. Marcus Carter was 42, sharp-jawed, always smiling, always saying exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. In public, he called Naomi sis, and hugged her at family events with what looked like genuine warmth. He complimented her work in front of Richard. He laughed at her jokes. He seemed, on the surface, like the brother she never had. But there was one thing Marcus understood the moment he stepped into that mansion. Something he understood with the cold clarity of a man calculating a business deal. Naomi was the only obstacle standing between him and an empire worth billions. While Naomi believed they were building a real relationship, Marcus was quietly studying company structures late at night. He memorized which executives were unhappy with their bonuses. He learned which board members resented answering to a woman 20 years their junior. He built relationships, not friendships, relationships with the exact people who would one day help him take everything. Naomi never saw it coming. Why would she? She was in love. His name was Derek Sloan. Charismatic, ambitious, hungry for success in a way that Naomi found admirable rather than alarming. He ran a small development startup that Naomi genuinely believed in, so much so that she convinced her father to make a modest early investment. Derek proposed to her on the rooftop of one of the buildings Carter Global had developed together, the entire Atlanta skyline glittering behind them like it was applauding. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood ambition the way I do," Derek told her that night, sliding the ring onto her finger. "You're not just the woman I love, Naomi. You're the partner I've been looking for my whole life." She believed him completely. She believed her life could not possibly get any better. Which is exactly the moment a story like this turns. The night before Richard planned to publicly announce Naomi as his official successor, an announcement that would have been broadcast to every major business outlet in the country, someone broke into the Carter Global servers and stole the company's most confidential development files, blueprints, negotiation strategies, investor contracts worth billions of dollars. By morning, the news had already spread. Financial television anchors were reading headlines about Carter Global's stolen intellectual property before Richard had even finished his first cup of coffee. Competitors somehow already had access to development plans that had taken years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build. The stock dipped violently. Panic spread through the boardroom like wildfire. Richard was devastated. But devastation quickly turned into fury when the internal investigation results landed on his desk. Bank transfer records, security access logs, digital signatures. All of it pointed toward one single employee, Naomi. "That's impossible," Naomi said the moment she was called into the emergency meeting, her voice cracking with disbelief as executives avoided eye contact with her around the long mahogany table. "I would never do this. Someone set this up. Someone is lying." "The logs show your credentials, Naomi," one board member said quietly. "Your access codes. Your timestamps." "Then someone stole my credentials," she said, panic rising in her throat. Dad, look at me. You know me. You raised me. You know I would never betray this company. Please." Richard sat at the head of the table, his hands pressed flat against the wood. His jaw locked so tight it looked like it might crack. For 15 years, Naomi had never once seen her father look at her the way he looked at her in that moment. Like she was a stranger. "Explain the transfers, Naomi," he said, his voice low and cold. "Explain the access logs. Explain why every single piece of evidence in this room points directly at you." "I can't explain something I didn't do." Even Derek, sitting quietly in the corner of the room as her fiancé and unofficial business advisor, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Derek," she whispered, turning to him, desperate now. Tell them this doesn't make sense. You know me better than anyone." Derek said nothing. That silence broke something in her more than any accusation had. That night, Naomi sat alone in her apartment, replaying the meeting over and over in her mind, searching for anything she might have missed. She called Marcus first, desperate for an ally. "Marcus, please, you have to help me talk to Dad," she said, her voice raw from crying. You know I would never do something like this. You know me. Of course I know you, Marcus said gently, his voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. I already talked to him, Naomi. I told him it doesn't add up. Just give it time. The truth always comes out. She believed him. She thanked him through tears. She had no idea that he had spent that very afternoon meeting privately with 2 board members, reassuring them that, unfortunately, the evidence speaks for itself, and that the family would support whatever decision protects the company's reputation. She called Vanessa next, her hands shaking as she dialed. Sweetheart, I wish there was something I could do, Vanessa said, her tone soft and maternal, almost convincing. But your father needs to make this decision on his own. I can't interfere in company matters. You understand, don't you? Naomi did not understand, but she was too exhausted, too frightened, too desperate to hold on to any lifeline to question it. She hung up the phone that night and cried herself to sleep, still believing, foolishly, that the people around her wanted the truth as badly as she did. 2 days later, in front of executives, lawyers, and journalists who had gathered expecting to hear an announcement of succession, Richard Carter stood at the podium instead and stripped his own daughter of everything she had spent her entire life building. Effective immediately, he said, his voice carrying through the silent room, Naomi Carter is terminated from all positions within Carter Global Properties and removed from any future claim to this company. Naomi stood in the back of that room, humiliation burning through every part of her body, and said nothing, because in that moment, watching her father's face, watching how easily he was willing to believe the worst about her, she understood something the rest of the room did not. This wasn't an accident. This was a plan. And it had worked exactly the way someone wanted it to work. Richard leaned into the microphone one final time and delivered the words that would haunt both of them for the next 15 years. You are no longer my daughter. Naomi walked out of that building with her head high and her hands trembling, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her cry. She would not defend herself again. Not to people who had already decided her guilt before she ever opened her mouth. Within weeks, the rest of her life collapsed like dominoes. Derek vanished, along with the investors' money from the very startup Naomi had helped build and believed in. Her personal accounts, tied to Carter Global's banking network, were frozen without warning. Her name, once printed in business magazines as the future of American real estate, was now attached to headlines about corporate espionage and fraud. No company would hire her. No former colleague would return her calls. Friends who once filled her social calendar suddenly had no time for her. Her engagement ring, the one Derek had promised meant forever, sat in a pawn shop drawer within 6 months, exchanged for enough cash to cover a single month's rent. Years passed like that. Slow, grinding, merciless years. She lost her apartment first, then her car, then the small storage unit where she kept the last remaining photographs of her childhood, of a father who used to lift her onto his shoulders at construction sites and tell her she was going to change the world someday. There was one woman who never let go of her hand through all of it. Olivia Grant had known Naomi since college, long before Carter Global, long before the scandal, long before any of it. When everyone else stopped answering their phones, Olivia showed up at Naomi's door with grocery bags and no judgment in her eyes. You don't have to explain anything to me, Olivia told her one night, sitting on the floor of Naomi's nearly empty apartment because the furniture had already been sold. I know who you are. I've always known who you are. Whatever happened in that boardroom, it wasn't you. Everyone else believes it was, Naomi whispered. Everyone else didn't grow up with you, Olivia said. I did. And I'm not going anywhere. For a while, that friendship was the only thing keeping Naomi from disappearing completely. But even Olivia had her own bills, her own family, her own limits to how much she could give. Naomi refused to let her friends sink alongside her, and slowly, painfully, she began pulling away from the one person still willing to catch her. She slept in shelters when she could get a bed. She slept in her car before she lost it, and after that, she slept wherever the night allowed her to disappear safely until morning. Church steps, 24-hour laundromats, the back corner of a bus station where security guards eventually learned her face and stopped asking questions. She learned which diners let her sit for hours over a single cup of coffee before a waitress would gently ask her to order something else or leave. She learned which library branches stayed open the latest, and which ones had outlets near the back tables where she could charge her dying phone while pretending to read. She learned how invisible a person could become in a city that once knew her name on every business page in the state. There were nights she stood outside restaurants she used to dine in as a Carter Global executive, watching through the glass as strangers laughed over dinners that cost more than she'd eaten in a week, and she asked herself the same question over and over. How did I get here? She never once asked herself if she deserved it, because deep down, beneath the exhaustion and the hunger and the humiliation, she always knew the truth. She had done nothing wrong, and that certainty, more than anything else, was the one thing that kept her alive through the coldest nights. Just when Naomi believed her life could not possibly sink any lower, something arrived that would change everything. A letter. It came in a plain envelope with no return address, forwarded through 3 different post offices before finally reaching the shelter where she had been staying. Inside was a single folded page, and on it, in familiar handwriting, one sentence. Asterisk. I finally found proof that you were innocent. Come to Atlanta. Trust no one but me. Harold. Asterisk. Harold Benson, Richard's lifelong attorney. The man who had drafted every major contract Carter Global had ever signed. The man who had known Naomi since she was a little girl sitting cross-legged on his office floor, coloring while her father negotiated deals in the next room. Naomi read that letter 17 times before she allowed herself to believe it was real. She had exactly $40 to her name. She used almost all of it on a bus ticket back to the city that had once been her entire world, and the city that had thrown her away like she was nothing. But before she and Harold could meet, tragedy struck first. Harold Benson died suddenly. A heart attack, according to the official report, alone in his office late at night. That same evening, a fire broke out in the building, gutting his office and destroying decades of legal files. Investigators called it an unfortunate coincidence. Naomi called it something else entirely the moment she heard the news. Murder. What no one else knew, what Marcus never anticipated, was that Harold had seen something coming. Weeks before his death, he had quietly mailed a small package to a P.O. box under a different name, an old trick from a man who had spent his career protecting the Carter family's darkest secrets. Inside that package wasn't evidence. It was simply a key to a forgotten safe deposit box in a small regional bank across the city, one that had nothing to do with Carter Global's official accounts. If you're still watching up to now, type, "I'm still here" in the comments section. Let's see how many of you are uncovering the truth with us tonight. Naomi found the bank 3 days later, her hands shaking as she signed the paperwork, her heart pounding as the vault attendant led her into the cold, silent room lined with steel boxes. She slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pulled the box free. Inside were handwritten journals filled with Harold's careful, cramped handwriting. Old contracts with signatures that didn't match what the company had on file. Voice recordings on aging cassette tapes. Photographs, grainy but unmistakable, of meetings that were never supposed to have happened. Each piece alone meant almost nothing. Together, laid out across a motel bed at 2 in the morning, they exposed 15 years of carefully constructed lies. Marcus had never acted alone. Derek hadn't simply been a coward who fled with stolen money. Vanessa hadn't been a passive bystander enjoying a life of luxury. Every betrayal Naomi had suffered connected back to a single, coordinated conspiracy, built years before that fateful board meeting and executed with surgical precision. Marcus had bribed 3 senior executives with promises of future equity if they helped bury Naomi's reputation. Vanessa had spent years quietly manipulating Richard, whispering doubts into his ear during pillow talk, planting the idea that Naomi was becoming too powerful, too independent, too much like her mother. Difficult, ungrateful. Derek had been paid $2 million, wired through 3 shell accounts, to seduce Naomi, gain her trust, help frame her for the theft, and disappear the moment the plan succeeded. Every single person Naomi had trusted with her whole heart had already been bought before she ever knew there was a war happening around her. She sat on that motel bed staring at photographs of her own fiancé, shaking hands with Marcus in a parking garage 2 weeks before the theft occurred. And she didn't cry. She had cried enough for 15 years. What rose in her chest instead was something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous than grief. Resolve. She called Olivia that night for the first time in almost a year, her voice trembling as she read pieces of Harold's journal out loud over the phone. "Naomi," Olivia said, stunned into silence for a long moment. "This is everything. This proves everything. Why haven't you gone to the police yet?" "Because whoever killed Harold is still out there," Naomi said quietly. "And if I go to the police with half a case, they'll bury it before it ever reaches a courtroom. Marcus has spent 15 years buying loyalty. I need something bigger than evidence. I need leverage they can't buy their way out of." "What are you going to do?" Naomi looked down at the folder of documents spread across the motel bed, at bank statements, at recordings, at 15 years of carefully hidden betrayal finally laid bare in front of her. "I'm going to take back what's mine," she said. "Not the money, not the title, the truth. And I'm going to make sure every single person who hurt me watches it happen in front of the whole world." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "That's going to take money you don't have, Naomi. Resources you don't have. Time you might not have if whoever killed Harold realizes you have his files." "Then I'll find another way," Naomi said. "I always have." She spent the following weeks moving quietly, cautiously, staying in a different location every few nights, using cash only, trusting almost no one. She reached out to former investors who had once respected her judgment. Men and women who remembered the sharp, brilliant young executive she used to be. People who had always privately doubted the theft accusations made against her but had been too afraid of Marcus's growing influence to say so out loud. One by one, she rebuilt a network in the shadows. Slowly, silently, while Carter Global crumbled above her, unaware that the daughter they had discarded was quietly assembling the very weapon that would bring the entire conspiracy crashing down. While Naomi pieced together the truth in that cramped motel room, Carter Global Properties was quietly falling apart. Major development projects stalled without warning. Banks, sensing instability at the top, began freezing lines of credit. Investors who once trusted Richard's judgment implicitly started pulling out, spooked by rumors they couldn't quite name but somehow all seemed to know. Richard, now 70 years old and visibly worn down by years of stress and quiet regret he never spoke aloud, grew weaker under the pressure. His once-iron grip on the company began to slip. And Marcus, ever patient, ever calculating, saw his opportunity. "Dad, you need to rest," Marcus told him one evening, his voice dripping with false concern as they sat in Richard's study. "Let me take emergency operational control. Just temporarily. Just until the company stabilizes. You've given this empire everything. Let someone protect it for you now." Richard, exhausted and unknowingly surrounded by people who had spent years engineering his downfall, signed the transfer of emergency authority without reading every line. It was the single greatest mistake of his professional life, and he had no idea he had just made it. Thousands of employees, people with mortgages, children, entire lives built around the stability of Carter Global, now stood one bad decision away from losing everything, all because the man who orchestrated Naomi's destruction was now one signature away from full control. Naomi now faced the most important decision of her life. She could take everything she and Harold had uncovered straight to the media and destroy Marcus, Vanessa, and Derek publicly and immediately. Or she could walk away completely, disappear into whatever quiet life she could rebuild for herself, far from the family that had discarded her without a second thought. She chose neither. Instead, working quietly through a small group of anonymous investors she had spent years earning the trust of during her time in the shadows, people who remembered the brilliant young executive she used to be, people who believed the theft accusations had never quite made sense, Naomi began buying up Carter Global's largest outstanding debt. Piece by piece, loan by loan, silently, invisibly, without a single person inside that mansion realizing it. The homeless daughter they had thrown out into the rain now controlled whether her father's billion-dollar empire survived the next financial quarter. 2 weeks later, Carter Global hosted its annual leadership gala. An extravagant, glittering event held in one of the very towers Naomi had helped design a decade earlier. Politicians mingled with celebrities. Journalists roamed the ballroom capturing photographs for the next morning's business pages. Champagne flowed freely beneath crystal chandeliers as Marcus prepared to walk onto the stage and formally announce himself as Carter Global's new permanent chief executive officer. He had rehearsed his speech for weeks. He had chosen his tailored suit with precision. Every detail of this night had been engineered for his triumph. Then the ballroom doors opened, and Naomi walked in. No jewelry, no entourage, no bodyguards trailing behind her. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her expression calm in a way that unsettled the room far more than any dramatic entrance could have. People near the door stopped mid-conversation. Whispers rippled outward like a stone dropped into still water. "Isn't that the daughter who stole from her own family? I heard she's been homeless for years. What is she even doing here?" Marcus, standing near the stage, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. To him, this looked like desperation. A broken woman crashing a party she was never invited to. One final humiliation before she disappeared for good. He had no idea he was watching the beginning of his own downfall. Naomi walked calmly to the center of the ballroom, pulled a small remote from her purse, and pressed a single button. Every screen in that room, the massive displays behind the stage, the smaller monitors near the bar, the projection screens set up for Marcus's CEO announcement, flickered to life simultaneously. Voice recordings began playing through the ballroom's sound system, Marcus's own voice, unmistakable, discussing bribery payments with executives in exchange for their silence. Bank transfer documents appeared on screen, showing $2 million moving from a Carter Global Shell account directly into Derek Sloan's personal accounts. Original signatures, emails that had never been meant to see daylight. Security footage timestamped from the night of the original theft, showing Marcus's own access badge entering the server room minutes before the stolen files were copied. Harold's journals, scanned and displayed in full page after page, documenting years of manipulation in his own careful handwriting. Marcus's private conversations, recorded without his knowledge, laying out the entire 15-year conspiracy in his own words. Derek's confession, recorded just days earlier after Naomi confronted him privately, his voice shaking as he admitted everything on tape. Vanessa's financial agreements, proving payments received in exchange for turning Richard against his own daughter. Everything unfolded in perfect, devastating order across every screen in that ballroom, while 300 of Atlanta's most powerful people watched in stunned silence. If your heart is racing right now the way ours is, smash that like button, drop a comment telling us what you would have done in Naomi's position, and don't forget to subscribe. This story is about to reach its breaking point. Richard stood near the stage, his champagne glass slipping from his fingers and shattering against the marble floor, his face draining of all color as 15 years of certainty collapsed in front of him in real time. Every lie he had believed, every accusation he had accepted without question. Every moment he had chosen his new wife and stepson's whispers over his own daughter's desperate pleas. The ballroom fell into absolute silence. Then federal investigators, quietly invited by Naomi weeks earlier, waiting outside for exactly this moment, walked through the main doors. Marcus bolted for the side exit, shoving past stunned guests, his composed mask completely shattered. He made it exactly 11 steps before 2 agents intercepted him, pressing him against the wall as gasps rippled through the crowd and camera flashes exploded from every direction. "This is a mistake," Marcus shouted as they cuffed his wrists. "You don't understand who I am. You don't understand who my family is." "We understand exactly who you are, Mr. Carter," one agent replied flatly. "That's precisely why we're here." Vanessa collapsed into a chair near the bar, sobbing uncontrollably as guests who had complimented her elegance just moments earlier now stared at her with open contempt. Derek was arrested hours later in another state, caught trying to board a flight out of the country under a different name. Richard stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, staring at his daughter across the wreckage of everything he thought he knew, finally understanding, far too late, that the only person in his entire family who had never once betrayed him was the one he had thrown out into the rain. Naomi didn't wait for applause. She didn't wait for apologies. She turned and walked toward the exit, leaving chaos behind her. Richard ran after her, not as a billionaire, not as the founder of an empire, just as a father, 70 years old, chasing his daughter through a marble hallway with his tie loosened and his hands trembling. "Naomi!" he called out, his voice cracking in a way no boardroom had ever heard from him. "Naomi, please wait." She stopped at the top of the grand staircase, but she didn't turn around right away. When she finally did, Richard was already falling to his knees in front of her. Right there on the cold marble floor, in front of security guards and stunned onlookers and cameras that would capture this moment for every news outlet in the country by morning. "I lost my company tonight," he whispered, tears streaming freely down a face that had never allowed itself to cry in public before. "The board will strip my title by next week. The banks will pull out. Everything I built might collapse. But none of that matters right now. Because losing you 15 years ago, that was the greatest failure of my entire life, and I have had to live with it every single day since." Naomi looked down at her father, this man who had once lifted her onto his shoulders and called her the future of everything he built, now kneeling and broken in front of her. "Naomi, please," Richard said, reaching for her hand. "Tell me what I can do. Tell me how to fix 15 years. I'll do anything. I'll sign anything. I'll give everything away if it means you'll let me be your father again." "You can't buy this back, Dad," Naomi said softly, and for the first time all night, her voice cracked. "You spent your whole life building an empire out of things you could control with money. But this was never something money could fix. You didn't lose me because of Marcus or Vanessa or Derek. You lost me the moment you looked at your own daughter and chose to believe strangers over blood." Richard's shoulders shook as the weight of those words landed on him fully for the first time. "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I will spend whatever time I have left trying to earn back even a fraction of what I threw away." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the Carter family ring, the one he had given her the day she turned 18, the one she had kept hidden through every homeless night, every rejected job application, every moment she had nothing left but a torn backpack and her own certainty that the truth would eventually surface. She placed it gently into his open palm. "I didn't come back for the company," she said quietly. "I didn't come back for the money, or the apologies, or to watch Marcus get arrested. I came back because I wanted my father." She paused, her voice trembling for the first time all night. "I found a billionaire instead." She turned and walked down the staircase, leaving Richard kneeling alone in the wreckage of the empire he had built and nearly lost, sobbing not over the fortune slipping through his fingers, but over 15 years he could never get back. The cameras captured every second of it. By morning, footage of one of America's richest men on his knees, weeping for his daughter rather than his money, had spread across every major news outlet in the country. Months passed before the two of them spoke again. Richard publicly cleared Naomi's name in a formal statement that made headlines nationwide, admitting on record that he had let pride and manipulation blind him to the truth about his own daughter for 15 years. He resigned from daily leadership of Carter Global Properties, handing operational control to a board of trusted executives, while stepping back from the empire he had spent his entire life building. Naomi, meanwhile, refused the crown that was finally rightfully hers. Instead, using a portion of the money recovered through the fraud investigation, she established a national legal foundation dedicated to helping people who had been falsely accused, financially destroyed, or abandoned by powerful institutions that were supposed to protect them. She hired a small team of lawyers and investigators who understood exactly what it felt like to be disbelieved by the people who should have trusted them most. She chose purpose over power. Richard began volunteering there every single week, quietly, without fanfare, without press releases, sorting through case files and sitting in on client meetings alongside a daughter who had every reason in the world to walk away from him forever and never look back. Olivia joined the foundation's leadership team within its first month, refusing any title higher than the one that mattered most to her, friend who never left. Even Harold Benson's memory found its place there, in a small plaque near the entrance that read simply, "For the ones who kept the truth safe, even when it cost them everything." Naomi still had hard days. There were mornings she looked at her father across a conference table and felt 15 years of hurt rise up all over again, uninvited and unwelcome. Healing, she learned, was never a straight line. It was messy and slow, and it demanded patience from both of them in equal measure. It wasn't because she had forgiven him completely. Some nights she still wasn't sure she had. But she had come to understand something that 15 years of loss had taught her more clearly than any boardroom ever could. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's not a grand gesture on a marble staircase, captured perfectly by a camera crew. It's earned one day at a time. Money can build mansions, but only truth can rebuild a family. Pride may protect a fortune for a while, but humility is the only inheritance that actually lasts. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. What began with a daughter thrown into the rain became a story of betrayal, resilience, and the long, difficult road back to truth. A reminder that the people who wrong us don't always win, and that sometimes the richest person in any room is the one who finally lets go of bitterness and chooses to rebuild instead. Thank you so much for staying with us through every twist of Naomi's journey tonight. If this story moved you, made your heart race, or reminded you of your own strength through hard times, let us know in the comments what part you enjoyed the most. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next unforgettable story we bring you. What would you have done if you were Naomi? Would you have forgiven your father or walked away forever? Tell us below. We read every single comment. Until next time, remember this. Sometimes the richest person in the room isn't the one with the biggest fortune. It's the one who finally lets go of bitterness and chooses truth instead.